This story takes us back to the year 1757, when a young man named William Kent from Norfolk tied the knot with Elizabeth lines. Unfortunately, her family did not hold him in high regard, and their disapproval was soon to escalate. Tragically, Elizabeth passed away just after childbirth, and the baby, a boy, sadly survived for only a short time afterwards. One of Elizabeth's sisters, Fanny, had moved into the household to keep her sister company and to help with the child once he had been born. After some time had passed since Elizabeth's death, Fanny and William fell in love, but their relationship faced a legal obstacle. William sought legal advice and was informed that marrying his sister-in-law, Fanny, would be prohibited by the law. This was due to William's previous marriage to Elizabeth, with whom he had had a short-lived child. In an attempt to start afresh and leave this situation behind, William relocated to London in 1759. William and Fanny were not happy being separated, so they hatched a plan to help her run away to London, where they would live together as man and wife. After leaving their first accommodation, they needed to find another, and while visiting the church of St. Sepulchre's, Richard Parsons, the officiating clerk of the church that day, noticed a genteel couple standing in the aisle and showed them to a pew. After the service, this couple introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. William Kent and said they were in search of lodgings. Now, Mr. Parsons, in order to support his family, welcomed lodgers into his home on Cock Lane. Unfortunately, Parsons was also plagued by a drinking problem and asked William for a loan. William, being a compassionate individual, ended up lending Parsons some money. Regardless, the days passed pleasantly at the home between the two families. While William was out of town for business, Fanny extended an invitation to Richard Parsons' daughter Elizabeth, who was affectionately called Betty, to stay with her in her room. There is speculation that Fanny may have inadvertently revealed her and William's true status as an unmarried couple during their time together, but the child was only around 9 years old, so it seems a little odd that a grown woman would mention that to a child. I've also read that Fanny was seen crying by Mrs. Parson, who heard Fanny's confession, which to me seems a little bit more likely. But in the midst of a cold, moonless night, strange sounds began to emanate from the walls of their modest home. At first it was just a faint scratching noise, like the scuttling of a rodent. Betty Parsons was supposedly peacefully asleep in the room, while Fanny, on the other hand, found herself disturbed by the unfamiliar scratching and knocking sounds. When she mentioned the noises to Richard Parsons, he speculated that a nearby shoemaker might be the source of these strange noises, or it could just be the creaking of the old house. However, as the days passed, the noise grew louder and more persistent, often occurring at odd hours when no one should be awake. They even persisted on a quiet Sunday, so doubts started to be raised as to where the noises were coming from. But there's a noticeable coincidence. Once William Kent came back and Betty started sleeping in her own room again, the noises seemed to happen less frequently. In this time we see that Richard Parsons owed Kent money, and the two had started to argue about it, to the point that William and Fanny left their rooms at the Parsons' home and had to find lodgings elsewhere. It's said that William was having a house refurbished for him and Fanny, so they needed accommodation while this was ongoing. While in the new lodgings, Fanny became seriously ill. A doctor was called, and it was decided that Fanny must be moved to somewhere with better living conditions immediately. The doctor had diagnosed smallpox, and Fanny was treated for it. Although they had moved, Fanny, who was heavily pregnant at the time, passed away in January of 1760. William and Fanny had made a commitment to each other and had decided to have wills made up in which they bequeathed their worldly possessions to one another, much to the annoyance of Fanny's family. So when Fanny's family was told about her death, her sister was appalled at Fanny's will, which left her siblings very little, leaving the lion's share to Kent, including £150 and some land inherited from her brother. After a failed attempt to block the will, Kent made it clear that they had shown little regard for poor Fanny when she was still alive and sent the family packing. Kent also hadn't forgot about the debt owed to him by his old landlord Parsons. He took legal action and recovered his debts. Coincidentally, it would be now that the strange noises and occurrences re-emerged at the Cock Lane premises, and the story of the Cock Lane ghost began. At this time, 1761, new sounds echoed through the Parsons' home. It was suggested that the ghost that had bothered poor Fanny while she lived at the Cock Lane home was Elizabeth Lyons, the unfortunate sister of Fanny, and it was suggested that it was she who had been haunting Fanny, trying to warn her of what was to come. But now, after Fanny had passed, it was she who had renewed the haunting of the Parsons' home. This time it wasn't just knocking that was heard. They could hear terrifying scratching sounds too. And Betty, who was now about 12, was left shivering and sweating after the ghostly presence had shown itself. Due to this otherworldly scratching noises, the ghost became known as Scratching Fanny. Why would Fanny haunt this house? People wondered. Could she be trying to tell the young Betty something, as they'd become close while Fanny had stayed with them? Could Fanny be trying to give her a message? Perhaps Fanny had not died of smallpox after all. And an angry Parsons began a whisper that Mr. K could possibly have taken the life of poor Fanny. The foundation was now set, and the layers of the story were slowly being built upon it. Not long after the new sounds were heard, a neighbour allegedly saw a ghostly figure floating down some stairs at the home, and young Betty had started to make some odd squeal whining noises. The story spread through the streets, and Parsons invited a man of high standing to his home to witness the strange goings-on. The man saw nothing but heard the knocks. He later returned with a group of men, but they saw nothing. The apparition only showed itself to Betty, but the knocks they did hear. It became clear to the group that they could communicate in a fashion with the spooks, so the knocks were used as a communicative action. 1 knock for yes and 2 for no. It was by these means that Mr. Kent was accused of having taken the life of Fanny. The news spread through the church, finally reaching John Moore, the local reverend. Moore had become intrigued in the paranormal when he became interested in the beliefs of Methodist John Wesley, who was the leader of the Methodist movement. Wesley had started to take an interest in apparitions and witchcraft when he and his family experienced what they believed was paranormal in the form of the Epworth poltergeist, a spirit they had called Old Jeffrey. He and his family believed this particular noisy spirit had haunted the old rectory where they had lived, and it was from that experience his interest had grown from. The story of the Cock Lane ghost had spread to the point where people were starting to gather outside the residence. Seances were being conducted by a woman called Mary Fraser, a friend of the Parson family and a bit of a rogue herself. Much like Richard Parson, who started to see an opportunity to fill his purse. Cock Lane was so busy some nights that the thoroughfare was packed with coaches. Rich and poor, sceptics and believers alike started to flock to the Cock Lane to hear about this ghost. Seeing how much people had become fascinated by the whole affair, Parsons began charging people to attend the seances, using the excuse that because of the haunting he couldn't get the potential lodgers. These seances that took place were always carried out in the room of young Betty Parsons and her sister Anne, and it seemed that the noises came from the direction of the bed. In January 1762, when reading the Public Ledger, William Kent found out about the Cock Lane ghost and its supposed claim that it had been poisoned by a Mr. K. It stated that the mysterious Mr. K had caused the demise of the young woman. A disgusted and angry Mr. Kent realised what was going on and gathered together supporters when it became clear he was being persecuted by the Parsons, as suggestions were being made that maybe Fanny hadn't passed due to smallpox and maybe Mr. K had poisoned her. Certain important members of society, including nobility, visited Cock Lane. Horace Walpole, author of The Castle of Otranto, the first Gothic novel, was among the more famous of the visitors to visit Cock Lane, and he was of the opinion that the whole thing was a fraud, as were other well-known writers of the time. But the damage was done, and many people started to believe that Mr. K should be hanged. William was determined to disprove the existence of the alleged ghost and enlisted the help of Stephen Aldrich, the rector of St. John, Clerkenwell, who had visited Fanny on her deathbed. The whole situation was going to go further, with both Aldrich and Moore becoming more and more involved. Aldrich wanting Richard Parson prosecuted for the accusations against Mr. Kent, and Moore wanted to see Kent arrested. Eventually they both got the Mayor of London involved, who declared that there was not enough evidence from both sides to warrant an arrest. However, he did come up with a plan that had been previously suggested by Aldrich. Betty Parsons would be placed under investigation by Aldrich and closely monitored by trustworthy women. The purpose of this was to determine whether or not she was responsible for the strange noises that were believed to be caused by the ghost. Parsons didn't like this idea not at all and objected to it straight away. It wasn't until he was forced to send Betty to a Mr. John Bray's home by the mayor that he let his daughter go. Mud was slung from both sides during this time. Aldrich gathered a committee together to see if they could discover just what was going on and to uncover the whole sordid fraud. One of these people was the second Earl of Dartmouth, who, though he sympathised with the Methodists, was very concerned about the sort of press the Cock Lane ghost was attracting to the whole movement, and Dr. Samuel Johnson, who would write the account of their investigation for the press. The committee also included James Penn, a friend of Aldrich, and a lecturer at St. Anne's Church in Aldersgate. Captain Thomas Wilkinson, a neighbour of Parsons, who had attended a séance armed with a pistol to shoot the source of the noises. A physician, and Dr. John Douglas, a priest with a reputation for uncovering fraud. Betty's short-lived stay at John Bray's humble abode swiftly came to an end. The arrival of Betty caused quite the stir among nosy spectators who flocked to the house like moths to a flame. Even Mr. Bray's dear wife, daughter and dutiful household staff, all firm believers in the supernatural, were so rattled by Betty's eerie presence that they had no choice but to uproot her once more. The group of men and women who watched over Betty gathered together to begin the investigation at Aldrich's house. Nothing happened, just words from Betty. She had her hands out in front of her, and it was noted that she had calluses on her knuckles that looked like she had been hitting something hard for some time. Betty then claimed that the spirit would prove itself. On this, Betty boldly claimed that if the committee visited the crypt at St. John the Baptist's church, they could witness the ghost of Fanny knocking on her coffin. With just the small glow of the candles they carried, they waited in the near darkness amongst the tombs, and as expected, nothing happened. No ghostesses appeared, and they all walked away whispering, "What the hell, man, that was a waste of drinking time." Unsurprisingly, the committee had determined that Betty was responsible for the noises. The ladies that had attended Betty at the investigation made statements that they had noticed Betty concealing a small piece of wood on her person. Although knocking sounds were heard, they stopped as soon as Betty was told to show her hands. Samuel Johnson wrote, "On the night of the 1st of February, many gentlemen, eminent for their rank and character, were, by the invitation of the Reverend Mr. Aldrich of Clerkenwell, assembled at his house for the examination of the noises supposed to be made by a departed spirit, for the detection of some enormous crime. About 10 at night, the gentlemen met in the chamber at which the girl, supposed to be disturbed by the spirit, had, with proper caution, been put to bed by several ladies. They sat for more than an hour, and hearing nothing, went downstairs, when they interrogated the father of the girl, who denied in the strongest terms any knowledge or belief of fraud. The supposed spirit had before publicly promised by an affirmative knock that it would visit one of the gentlemen into the vault under the church of St. John at Clerkenwell, where the body Fanny's is deposited, and give a token of her presence there by a knock upon her coffin. While they were deliberating, they were summoned into the girl's chamber by some ladies who were near her bed, and who had heard knocks and scratches. When the gentleman entered, the girl declared that she felt the spirit like a mouse upon her back, and was required to hold her hands out of bed. From that time the spirit was asked to manifest its existence by appearance, or by impression on the hand or body of anyone present, by scratches, knocks, or by any other means. No evidence of any preternatural power was exhibited. The spirit was then told that the person to whom the promise was made, Mr. Kent, was then about to visit the vault, and that the performance of the promise should show itself. The company at 1 o'clock went into the church, and the gentleman to whom the promise was made went with another into the vault. The spirit was solemnly required to perform its promise, but nothing more than silence ensued. The person supposed to be accused by the spirit, Mr. Kent, then went down with several others, but no effect was perceived. Upon their return they examined the girl, but could draw no confession from her. Between 2 and 3 she desired and was permitted to go home with her father. It is therefore the opinion of the whole assembly that the child has had some art of making or counterfeiting a particular noise, and that there is no agency of any higher cause. Samuel Johnson, 1762. Although proven fake, the impact of this entire situation brought about the introduction of a new literary genre within the country, thanks to Horace Walpole's writing abilities. His book portrayed a story about a cursed castle where a man met his demise under a giant helmet. The emergence of Gothic novels rapidly gained popularity during this era, as people became captivated by these eerie tales. When the Cock Lane ghost was later revealed to be a fraud, John Moore was mocked for his part in the affair, and he flatly refused to write an affidavit to restore Kent's reputation, telling him that he still believed that the spirits present was a reminder of his sin. William Kent remained determined to clear his name. With the assistance of Aldrich, an undertaker, and the parish sexton, he returned to the crypt to prove beyond any doubt that a newspaper report which claimed that the supposed removal of Fanny's body from the vault accounted for the ghost's failure to knock on her coffin was false. They carefully removed the lid from the coffin in order to prove her remains were still there and to determine the cause of Fanny's death. As a result, it became evident that Kent was completely innocent of the alleged poisoning. On hearing this, Moore finally had to retract his previous claim and wrote a lengthy apology, stating that he'd been taken in and was now convinced that these knocking and scratchings were the effects of some artful, wicked contrivance. Ah, the magnificent troop of mischievous minds! In July 1762, the infamous gang consisted of John Moore, Richard Parsons and his dear wife, Mary Fraser and Richard James. There were two more characters in this thrilling conspiracy tale, Robert Brown and Charles Say. Kent took legal action and all were swiftly found guilty and ordered to pay Kent a substantial amount for the distress caused. Brown and Say gave Kent £50 each and escaped the clutches of the law. By November 1762, Moore and James had raised about £588 to pay damages to Kent, which enabled them to escape any further time behind bars. Parsons was eventually sent to the pillory on 3 occasions and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Mary Fraser, who had helped to conduct the séances, was sentenced to 6 months in Bridewell prison, and Richard Parsons' wife, Elizabeth, was sentenced to a year of hard labour. Despite being revealed as a fraud, Parsons, surprisingly, received a generous reception from the onlookers when he was brought to the pillory. Although the whole affair was a money-making fraud, some people appreciated the whole story and gave him money. This incident serves as a remarkable illustration of how a compelling ghost story can captivate people's imagination and underscores the enduring influence that belief in the supernatural holds over many individuals. The Cock Lane haunting was a bizarre episode in London's history, one that blended superstition, intrigue and public spectacle. Scratching Fanny, whether real or fabricated, left an indelible mark on the city's folklore, serving as a reminder of the enduring fascination with the supernatural and the lengths to which some will go to perpetuate a paranormal mystery. So what happened to the Parson family? As far as we know, they remained as a family, but not much else is known. It was also suggested that before Betty passed away, she disclosed just exactly how she had made the noises that had fooled believers and enraged sceptics. Cock Lane Humbug, a ballad of the time. The town it long has been in pain about the phantom in Cock Lane. To find it out they strove in vain, not one thing they neglected. They searched the bed and room complete to see if there was any cheat, while little Miss Looked So Sweet was not the least suspected. Then soon the knocking it begun, and then the scratching I would come. 'Twas pleased to answer anyone, and that was done by knocking. If you was poisoned, tell us true, for yes, not once, for no, not two. Then she knocked, I tell you, which needs must make it shocking. On Friday night, as many know, a noble lord did thither go. The ghost its knocking would not show, which made the guests to mutter. They begin gone, then one was there, who always called it my dear. Fanny was pleased, 'tis very clear, and then began to flutter. The ghost some gentlemen did tell, if they would go to Clerkenwell, into the vault where she did dwell, that they 3 knocks should hear. On Monday night they went, the man accused he was present, but all as death it was silent, the dear old knock was there, sir. The gentleman returned again and told young Missy flat and plain she was the agent of Cock Lane who knocked and scratched for Fanny. 'Twas false, each person did agree. Miss begged to go with her daddy, and then went into the country to knock and scratch for Fanny. Thank you for watching.